Most people believe they're unique, that their thoughts are private, that their motivations are hidden, that who they really are is concealed behind the social mask they present to the world, and they're wrong. Completely, predictably wrong. Because Francis Bacon discovered something that makes humans far more transparent than they realize. That human nature operates according to laws as predictable as physics. That behavior follows patterns that can be systematically observed and decoded. That reading people isn't mystical intuition. It's science. And once you understand the laws, humans become frighteningly readable. Bacon didn't develop this system for academic interest. He developed it for survival. In the treacherous political environment of Elizabethan England, misreading someone could cost you everything: your position, your wealth, your freedom, your life. So he approached the problem scientifically. He observed. He documented patterns. He tested predictions. He developed laws of human perception that allowed him to understand people with accuracy that seemed almost supernatural to those who didn't know his methods. And here's what makes this powerful. These laws still work. Human nature hasn't changed. The same patterns Bacon identified 400 years ago operate today. People think they're complex and mysterious. They're not. They're predictable. They follow patterns they don't even realize they're following. And once you know what to look for, once you understand the laws that govern human perception and behavior, reading people becomes systematic rather than guesswork. So let's break down Francis Bacon's laws of human perception, the scientific principles that make humans readable, the patterns that reveal true character beneath social performance, the mechanisms that allow you to predict behavior before it happens, and understand motivations people don't admit even to themselves. The first law is this: people reveal who they are through what they notice and what they ignore. Bacon observed that humans have selective attention. They notice things relevant to their interests, their fears, their values, their nature, and they're blind to things outside their concern. This creates a pattern that reveals internal reality even when they're trying to hide it. Watch what someone consistently notices. Watch what captures their attention. Watch what they comment on, what they remember, what they bring up in conversation. This reveals their true priorities regardless of what they claim matters to them. Someone who constantly notices status cares deeply about status, even if they claim not to. Someone who always sees threats is operating from fear, regardless of projected confidence. Someone who notices opportunities is ambitious, regardless of claimed contentment. And watch what they ignore, what they don't notice, what they forget, what seems invisible to them. This reveals their blind spots, their lack of concern for certain domains, their actual values by showing what they don't value enough to attend to. Someone who doesn't notice others' emotional states lacks empathy, whatever they claim about caring. Someone who doesn't see ethical issues has weak moral awareness, regardless of stated principles. Bacon used this constantly. He'd note what different people noticed in the same situation. Some saw political implications. Some saw financial opportunities. Some saw personal threats. Some saw nothing at all, and their selective attention revealed their nature, their concerns, their character more accurately than anything they said about themselves. The practical application is to track patterns over time. One instance doesn't tell you much, but consistent patterns of what someone notices and ignores that reveals their true nature. You can map their internal world by observing their selective attention. And once you know what they care about, what they fear, what they value, you can predict their behavior because you understand their motivations. The second law: people's stated reasons for their actions are almost never their actual reasons. Humans are not self-aware. They don't understand their own motivations. They create post hoc rationalizations that sound good but aren't accurate. And if you believe their stated reasons, you'll misunderstand them completely. You have to look past what they say to what actually drives them. Bacon observed this everywhere. People would claim to act from principle when they were actually acting from self-interest. would claim to be helping others when they were actually helping themselves, would attribute their choices to logic when they were actually driven by emotion or habit. The stated reason and the actual reason were consistently different, and believing the stated reason meant being constantly surprised by behavior that was actually quite predictable once you understood actual motivations. So how do you identify actual motivations? You watch patterns of behavior across situations. You note what they consistently do regardless of what they say. You observe what they sacrifice and what they protect. You see where their effort actually goes versus where they claim it goes. Actions reveal actual priorities. Stated reasons reveal desired self-image. They're rarely the same. Someone claims they stay in a bad job because of loyalty or responsibility, but they never look for other options. They don't develop skills that would create alternatives. Their behavior reveals they're staying because they're afraid of change or don't believe they could succeed elsewhere. Fear and low confidence are the actual motivations. Loyalty is the flattering story they tell themselves. Someone claims they're helping you out of friendship or kindness, but they only help when it's convenient. They disappear when help would be costly. They keep score of what you owe them. Their behavior reveals they're helping because they expect reciprocity or want to feel superior. Self-interest and ego are the actual motivations. Friendship is the social packaging. Bacon never believed stated reasons. He watched actual behavior patterns and inferred actual motivations from those patterns. This made him far more accurate in predicting behavior than people who took others at their word, because stated reasons change based on audience and situation, but actual motivations are consistent and predictable once identified. The third law, under pressure, people reveal their true nature. Social masks require cognitive effort to maintain. When pressure increases, when stakes rise, when stress impacts, that effort becomes harder to sustain. The mask slips, the performance breaks down, and you see what's actually there beneath the presentation. Bacon would note how people behaved under stress. When threatened, when faced with difficult decisions, when tired or drunk or emotional. These were the moments when true character emerged. The person who's charming and generous when life is easy might become selfish and cruel when threatened. The person who seems confident in comfort might become paralyzed in crisis. The person who appears principled in easy choices might reveal they have no actual principles when those principles become costly. This is why Bacon advised observing people across contexts. Someone might perform well in one set of circumstances, but differently when circumstances change. You need to see how they handle pressure, adversity, temptation, conflict, to really understand what they're made of. Because anyone can maintain a good mask in favorable conditions. True character shows in unfavorable ones. The practical method is to note people's behavior specifically in 3 types of situations. First, when they think no one important is watching. How do they treat service workers? How do they behave when their boss isn't around? What do they do when they think there are no consequences? This reveals what they're like when social pressure to perform is removed. Second, when something they want is at stake. How do they pursue opportunities? What are they willing to do to get what they want? What boundaries do they respect or violate when motivated? This reveals their actual ethics, which are often different from their stated ethics. Third, when they're in conflict or under threat. How do they respond to challenges? Do they stay calm or panic? Do they fight or flee or freeze? Do they think strategically or react emotionally? Do they maintain principles or abandon them? This reveals their actual capabilities and character under pressure. Bacon would deliberately create these situations sometimes, not maliciously, but as tests. He'd observe how people handled difficult tasks, how they responded when he was unavailable, how they behaved when they thought he couldn't see them. He'd note who maintained consistency and who changed dramatically, and these observations told him who to trust and who to watch carefully. The fourth law, people's treatment of those they have power over reveals their true character better than their treatment of those who have power over them. Anyone can kiss up, can perform for superiors, can be respectful to those who can harm them. But how someone treats those who can't fight back, that reveals their actual nature. Bacon observed that cruel people are kind to powerful people and cruel to weak people, that manipulators are charming to those they want to use and dismissive of those they don't need, that narcissists are respectful to those who feed their ego and abusive to those who don't. The pattern is consistent. How someone treats the powerless is who they actually are. How they treat the powerful is just strategy. So you watch how they treat subordinates, service workers, people in need, anyone who can't retaliate or offer them anything. If they're dismissive, rude, exploitative, that's their nature. If they're respectful, kind, fair, that's their nature. The treatment of the powerless is the most accurate character test because there's no strategic reason to perform. They're showing you who they are when performance isn't required. This also applies to how they talk about people who aren't present. Someone who talks badly about everyone behind their backs will talk badly about you behind yours. Someone who betrays confidences of others will betray yours. Someone who exploits those who trust them will exploit you when it serves them. Past behavior with others is the best predictor of future behavior with you. Bacon would note how people spoke about others when those others weren't present. Not just the content, but the pattern. Did they respect confidences? Did they speak fairly? Did they acknowledge others' perspectives? Or did they gossip destructively, betray trusts, and show contempt for anyone not present? This pattern told him who could be trusted and who couldn't, regardless of how they treated him personally. The fifth law. People project their own nature onto others. They assume others think like they think, feel like they feel, operate like they operate. This projection reveals their own psychology even when they think they're describing others. Someone who constantly worries about being betrayed probably betrays others and assumes everyone operates that way. Someone who doesn't trust anyone probably untrustworthy themselves and thinks everyone is. Someone who always sees selfish motives in others probably highly selfish and can't imagine people acting from other motivations. What they accuse others of, what they warn you about, what they claim everyone does, that's often exactly what they do. Bacon used this as a diagnostic tool. He'd listen to how people described human nature, what they claimed everyone was like, what they warned him to watch for, and he'd note that they were usually describing themselves. The person who says everyone lies is usually a liar. The person who says everyone cheats is usually a cheater. The person who says you can't trust anyone is usually untrustworthy. They're not actually reporting on human nature generally. They're projecting their nature specifically. This works because people lack self-awareness but have deep familiarity with their own psychology. They know intimately how they think and operate. They just don't realize it's specific to them rather than universal. So when they describe how people are or what humans do, they're actually giving you detailed information about their own psychology while thinking they're being wise about human nature generally. The practical application is to listen carefully when people make statements about everyone or people in general. They're usually talking about themselves. Someone says everyone has a price. They have a price. Someone says nobody really helps others without ulterior motives. They don't help others without ulterior motives. Someone says trust is for fools because everyone betrays you eventually. They betray people and expect everyone to be like them. They've just told you exactly who they are while thinking they told you about everyone else. The sixth law, people's fears reveal their weaknesses, and their deepest desires reveal their vulnerabilities. What someone is afraid of tells you what they can't handle. What they desperately want tells you what they'll sacrifice to get, and both give you leverage over them if you understand how to use it. Bacon observed that fear and desire are the two forces that make humans most predictable and most controllable. Someone afraid of poverty will make decisions to avoid poverty even when those decisions harm them in other ways. Someone desperate for approval will compromise principles for acceptance. Someone terrified of being alone will stay in bad relationships. The fear drives behavior in ways that can be predicted and exploited. Similarly, someone who desperately wants status will sacrifice almost anything for it. Someone who craves power will betray allies to get it. Someone who needs to feel important will be flattered into terrible decisions. The desperate desire creates vulnerability that can be used by anyone who recognizes it. This doesn't mean you should exploit people's fears and desires maliciously, but it means you need to identify them to understand behavior. Why did they make that choice? Because it served their desire or avoided their fear. Why did they betray that principle? Because their fear or desire was stronger than their principle. Why are they so predictable in certain situations? Because those situations trigger core fears or desires that override other considerations. Bacon would carefully observe what made people anxious, what they desperately pursued, what they couldn't stop talking about. These emotional patterns revealed their psychological vulnerabilities. And knowing someone's vulnerabilities meant being able to predict when they'd act rationally and when their fear or desire would override reason. It meant knowing when they were reliable and when they'd be controlled by emotional imperatives stronger than their stated commitments. The seventh law: habits reveal character more accurately than intentions. People claim all sorts of intentions. They'll tell you who they're trying to be, what they plan to do, how they intend to change. Ignore this. Watch their habits. Watch what they actually do consistently. Because habits are the truth about someone. Intentions are just comfortable stories. Bacon noticed that people's habits were far more predictive than their stated goals. Someone who habitually procrastinates will continue to procrastinate regardless of stated intentions to change. Someone who habitually lies will continue to lie even while claiming to value honesty. Someone who habitually betrays will betray again despite promises of loyalty. The habit is the character. The intention is the story they tell to feel better about the habit, so you identify someone's patterns. What do they consistently do? Not what they say they do or wish they did, but what they actually do repeatedly. How do they habitually respond to certain situations? What are their automatic behaviors that show up across contexts? These habits are who they actually are, regardless of who they claim to be or intend to become. Someone habitually avoids difficult conversations. That's who they are. Conflict avoidant. They'll tell you they're going to confront an issue. They're planning to have that hard talk. They intend to address the problem. Don't believe it. Watch the habit. The habit says they avoid. So they'll avoid this too. Predicting their behavior from their habit is far more accurate than believing their stated intention. Bacon would track people's behavioral patterns over time. He'd note what they did consistently, regardless of what they said. And he'd predict future behavior based on those patterns. This made him far more accurate than people who believed stated intentions. Because intentions are hopes, habits are reality. And reality is what you need to base predictions on. The eighth law: people's spending patterns reveal their actual values better than their stated values. Money is a resource people are generally careful with. How they spend it, what they spend it on, what they prioritize financially, this reveals what they actually value, not what they claim to value, what they actually value enough to allocate scarce resources toward. Someone claims family is their top priority, but spends nothing on family activities while spending heavily on personal entertainment? Their revealed preference is that personal entertainment is higher priority than family. Someone claims to value learning but spends nothing on education while spending heavily on consumption. Their actual value is consumption, not learning. What people spend money, time, and energy on is what they actually value. Bacon would observe people's actual resource allocation, not what they said mattered to them, but where their resources actually went. This told him what really drove them. Someone who claimed to be generous but never actually parted with resources wasn't actually generous. Someone who claimed certain principles but allocated zero resources toward those principles didn't actually hold them. The pattern of resource allocation was the truth. The stated values were the performance. You can apply this to yourself as well as others. Look at where your money actually goes, where your time actually goes, where your energy actually goes. That's what you actually value. Your stated values might be different. Your aspirational values might be different. But your revealed preferences, shown through resource allocation, those are your actual values. And the same is true for everyone else. Watch what people actually spend resources on, not what they claim to care about. The 9th law. Consistency is rarer than people think, and its presence or absence is diagnostic. Most people are not consistent. They say one thing and do another. They have principles in one context and abandon them in another. They're generous sometimes and selfish other times. This inconsistency is normal human behavior. But when you find someone who is genuinely consistent, that tells you something important. Bacon observed that consistency requires either deep principle or calculated performance. If someone is consistently honest across contexts, they either have deep moral commitment to honesty or they're calculating that consistent honesty serves their interests. Either way, you can rely on their honesty. But if someone's honesty is inconsistent, they're honest when convenient and dishonest when beneficial. You can't rely on them. The same applies to any trait. Consistent kindness suggests either genuine care or strategic niceness. Either way, you can expect kind treatment. Inconsistent kindness suggests kindness only when it costs nothing or serves self-interest. You can't expect kind treatment when it would be costly. Consistent courage suggests real courage. Inconsistent courage suggests courage only when risk is low. You can't count on them when risk is high. So you watch for consistency or inconsistency across contexts and over time. Someone who's reliable in easy situations but unreliable in hard ones isn't actually reliable. Someone who's loyal when you're successful but absent when you're struggling isn't actually loyal. Someone who keeps small commitments but breaks large ones isn't actually trustworthy. Consistency, or lack of it, tells you what you can actually expect from someone. Bacon would test people's consistency deliberately. He'd observe how they behaved in different contexts, whether they maintained principles when those principles became costly, whether they kept commitments when keeping them became inconvenient, whether they stayed loyal when loyalty stopped being beneficial. And this testing revealed who was genuinely consistent and who just performed consistency when it was easy. The 10th law. People's emotional patterns are more stable than their circumstances. Someone who's generally anxious will find things to be anxious about, regardless of circumstances. Someone who's generally happy will find things to be happy about, regardless of difficulties. Someone who's generally angry will find things to be angry about, regardless of how they're treated. The emotional pattern is internal and stable. Circumstances just provide content for the pattern to express itself. Bacon noticed that people had characteristic emotional states, baseline moods they returned to regardless of what happened. And these baselines predicted far more about their behavior and interpretation of events than the events themselves did. An anxious person would interpret neutral events as threatening. A suspicious person would see betrayal in innocent actions. An angry person would find reasons to be angry in situations that wouldn't anger others. This means you can't make someone happy by changing their circumstances if they're dispositionally unhappy. You can't make someone trust you if they're dispositionally suspicious. You can't satisfy someone who's dispositionally dissatisfied. The emotional pattern will persist regardless of external changes, and trying to fix it through external means is wasting effort because the pattern is internal. What you can do is recognize people's emotional baselines and factor them into your predictions. If someone is dispositionally anxious, expect anxious interpretations and anxious behavior. If someone is dispositionally negative, expect negative interpretations regardless of actual circumstances. If someone is dispositionally volatile, expect emotional instability regardless of how well you treat them. The baseline emotion tells you more about what to expect than the current situation does. Bacon would identify people's emotional baselines and then adjust his interpretations of their behavior accordingly. If someone seemed worried, he'd first ask whether they were dispositionally anxious or whether something was actually wrong. If someone seemed angry, he'd ask whether they were dispositionally irritable or whether something had actually offended them. The baseline helped him distinguish between characteristic emotional expression and genuine response to circumstances. The final law, the one Bacon considered most powerful: people become most like themselves when they think no one who matters is watching. The most accurate view of someone's character comes from observing them when they believe social consequences are absent, when they think you can't see them, when they think their behavior won't be reported to anyone who could affect their life. That's when the mask comes off completely. That's when you see who they actually are. This is why positions of power reveal character. When someone has power over others and minimal accountability, you see their true nature. Are they fair or arbitrary? Kind or cruel? Responsible or abusive? Power reveals character because it removes consequences that normally constrain behavior. The person who's kind when kindness is required for social acceptance but cruel when they can get away with it isn't actually kind. They're strategic, and power reveals the difference. Bacon would engineer situations where people thought they were unobserved or thought consequences were absent, not to trap them maliciously, but to see their true nature. He'd observe how they behaved toward those who couldn't retaliate, how they acted when they thought he was unaware, how they operated when they believed their actions wouldn't be traced back to them. And these observations revealed character that would otherwise stay hidden behind social performance. For you, this means the most accurate information about someone comes from observing them when they don't think it matters. How they treat servers at restaurants, how they drive when they think no one knows them, how they talk about others when those others aren't present, how they behave in anonymous situations. These are the moments when social mask is weakest and true character emerges. So there you have Francis Bacon's laws of human perception, the scientific principles that make people readable. Watch what they notice and ignore to map their internal world. Ignore stated reasons and infer actual motivations from behavioral patterns. Observe them under pressure to see their true nature. Watch how they treat the powerless to assess their character. Listen to their projections to understand their own psychology. Identify their fears and desires to predict their behavior. Track their habits to know who they really are. Watch their resource allocation to discover their actual values. Note their consistency or inconsistency to determine reliability. Recognize their emotional baselines to interpret their behavior accurately, and observe them when they think no one's watching to see their authentic character. These aren't tricks or hacks. They're systematic observation based on understanding human nature as lawful rather than random. People aren't mysterious. They're predictable. They follow patterns. They reveal themselves constantly through mechanisms they're not aware of. And once you understand these laws, once you learn to observe systematically rather than just casually, reading people becomes scientific rather than intuitive. Bacon didn't have mystical insight into human nature. He had systematic observation and pattern recognition. He treated human behavior as something to be studied and understood rather than something to be assumed or guessed at. And this scientific approach made him far more accurate in reading people than those who relied on intuition or took people at face value. You can develop the same capability, not overnight, but through consistent application of these laws. Watch people systematically, document patterns, test predictions, refine your understanding. Over time, you'll develop accuracy in reading people that seems almost supernatural to those who don't know your methods, because you're seeing patterns they don't see, understanding motivations they don't understand, predicting behavior they think is unpredictable. This is the science of reading people. Not mysticism, not intuition, not guesswork. Scientific observation of lawful patterns in human perception and behavior. The patterns Francis Bacon identified 400 years ago, the patterns that still work today, the patterns that make humans far more transparent and predictable than they realize. And once you see the patterns, once you understand the laws, you can't unsee them. You'll read people constantly, automatically, with accuracy that would have been impossible before you understood that human nature operates according to predictable principles rather than mysterious complexity. That's what Bacon discovered. That's what allowed him to navigate treacherous political waters without getting destroyed. That's what you can develop through systematic observation and application of these laws. The science of reading people, the systematic understanding of human perception, the ability to see beneath social masks to the predictable patterns underneath. Not magic, not mystery, just science applied to human nature, and it works.